step parenting. What a wild ride it's been for me. And since talking about my role as a step parent openly and the fact that I enlisted the help of a step parenting therapist, I have been inundated with so many questions from fellow step parents or people who know step parents asking me for advice, for wisdom, for guidance. And since I'm not an expert in this role, I am 6.5 years into my role as a step parent and so grateful to have been able to enlist the help from the very beginning of Ashley, my therapist, step parenting therapist, and coach. And I wanted to take all of your questions and take them into conversation with her. We got so many questions for this episode, truly just pages and pages. I've never received so many questions before on a specific subject, which to me indicates that there is a need for more support for all of us step parents. And I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation with Ashley, get her wisdom, and also to know that there are many more episodes that are needed to be recorded and conversations to be had around this subject matter. And let's jump right into step parenting. I've taken so many polls on Instagram over my time on Instagram, and I have never had as many responses and questions submitted as I
Mm.
did with this subject matter of step parenting, which to me, I've always voiced to you and also just always felt that there's such a lack of support with step parenting
Mhm,
because it's such a confusing role. And
mhm,
also because I am lucky to be able to have the role of a step parent and a parent myself. So to
mhm,
see how many resources are out there for parenting and how
mhm,
few resources that are helpful are out there for step parenting was even more solidified by this giant influx of questions that were submitted, um, just about wanting help, wanting tools, wanting guidance in so many areas of step parenting that we won't be able to get to all in this episode.
mm-mm,
But I mean, wow. Is that surprising to you or
mhm.
not really?
It isn't. I mean, I feel like because it way back when we met, it was the, article in Goop,
Yeah.
and you said back then, I think your sister found that article
Yeah,
and
she did.
said, yeah, she did, and she said, "Oh, you have to reach out to this person because there's no conversation out there
Mhm.
about this," and here we are 5 years later?
6 years later, 6.5 years
6,
later.
6, 6. Oh, shoot. Oh, shoot.
6.5 years later, and we're still here.
And we're still having the same
We
conversation
are.
or
Yeah.
lack thereof,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it is so complicated.
It
Six
really
and a
is,
half
and
years.
I know, isn't that crazy? Wild ride. It really is. It's so interesting. And it's also really interesting for me as a step parent who is lucky enough to be able to work with someone like you as a step parenting coach and therapist to be able to
Thank you.
look at all of these questions that were submitted and
Mhm,
see what themes continue to come up in whether it's my
mhm,
own experience as a step parent and my own journey, and to see how many people are needing help and needing guidance in similar subjects, and then also in subjects that maybe I haven't experienced myself, but that I've heard of other people experiencing.
mhm,
And what's also so cool to me is since being open about enlisting your guidance and your wisdom and help as a therapist in my role as a step parent, how many people have reached out to me that I know and also that I don't know of just saying, like, I didn't even know that was a thing, and how cool that you're
mm.
able to do that. And also, can you please help me? Because so many people are so lost and confused in their role as a step parent, or I guess what that role even is. Like, what
Mhm.
is the role of a step parent today?
Mhm. And I feel like that's been the biggest part of our conversation, hasn't it?
Yes,
That
for sure.
you're kind of a parent, but you're not a parent, but you need to take a back seat. And then there's the transitions. I always think about the transitions and
Mhm.
how do you have your children in your home that might be your biological children, and then a stepchild is coming back and forth. And how do you figure out all of this at once? And every family is so different. I'm sure the people you talk to, you think, okay, there's some similarities, there's
Mhm.
some really big differences. So it isn't a one size, and you know this as a mom, it isn't a one size fits all for parenting, much less step parenting.
For sure. I mean, I think the one thing that you lack as a step parent that you have as a parent is, you know, for me with my biological children, I have all of these moms that I'm kind of going through these phases of parenting alongside. So we all can kind of talk,
Mhm,
ask advice, ask wisdom, or support, or joke about certain things that our kids are doing or experiencing and learn from each other. But with step parenting, it's very rare that you're doing that alongside a friend um,
mhm,
or somebody that you can kind of go to talk to about certain things or certain things that might come up or so that is like a big thing that seems to be lacking in step parenting at all phases is just like you don't really have as much of a support system in the
mhm,
many phases of it. And as I've said many times, you're not a parent, you're
mhm.
not a nanny, you're not an assistant, you're a step parent. But for a lot of step parents, you're kind of doing all of those different roles in one, but also teetering the role of, but you're still not a parent, which
Mhm,
makes it
mhm,
so confusing as to what exactly you should be responsible for, not responsible for. What line do you cross? Is there a line to cross?
mhm,
All these
mhm.
things.
I I'm surprised we haven't come up with a title for it yet,
I know.
because it is a mixture of all of those things. Because you really are. You're a parent, you're a step parent, you're a nanny, you're an assistant, you're a disciplinarian, you're not. All of those things mixed together. And step parenting has gotten a really bad rap. I mean, what was the Julia Roberts movie, like Step Monster?
Yeah.
It's
I
a
mean,
really
yeah, it's really true because step parenting historically and in movies and just, over time, the word step parent in general has always had negative connotation. You can be an evil
Mhm,
stepmother. There is,
mhm.
everything negative. So already when you step into the role, you have this kind of just negativity that comes with the role in general. Then you're kind
Mhm,
of entering into what it means to be a step parent. And that's different for everyone just based off of what everyone's family dynamics and
mhm,
co-parenting dynamics look like. But for you in your practice, how do you help someone who's entering into the role of step parent navigate what that role looks like for them?
mm. I think the first most important thing is to have some really clear ideas around what it will mean around discipline. And stepchild isn't needs connection more than anything, and that's really hard when you have um, uh, a second person. It's kind of easy for the biological parent to do that kind of connection if the child's coming in and out of the house. But for the step parent, it can be really discombobulating because you're trying to have some, and I know in your life, it's like you're trying to have some order, you're trying to have Some rules, you're trying to actually help a child grow into something that actually will make them feel better in the long run. And so it's really helping the parents to try the parents that are in each home to get on the same page. And I remember years ago talking about when a child comes back into your home, can you just step back for, a day or two and let that kind of recalibration happen without there being too much tense intensity to it? And every other person I've ever worked with in this situation says, but it's my home. They're coming back into my home. I shouldn't have to step back and do anything. But the truth is that the whole family kind of gets thrown off when a child comes in and out of the home. And that isn't the child's fault. It's not your fault. It's this situation of things moving and shifting and having to just kind of rebalance for a second. And because you and I have been doing this for a long time together, I feel like I can say that was one of those things where you said, I'm not so sure." But then when you did, you said, "Okay, this makes sense. This actually makes
Mhm.
so much sense. We're just going to kind of drop the rules, not everything, but just drop the intensity of the rules for a day or 2 days so that everybody can rebalance in the home. And then there tends to be a little more smoothness, a
Mhm.
little more ability. I don't know, you could probably put it into some
Well, I think,
word.
yeah, the biggest thing that when it comes to that specific subject is really understanding what you framed to me, which was, and for anybody who has a child that goes back and forth between homes, like we do, is this concept of code switching. When
Ah,
I learned
yes.
about code switching from you, it was like light bulbs went off in my head. Can you explain code switching for those who might not be as familiar as I am with what that means for the child going back and forth,
Mhm.
and also for the parents in each home or other children in each home to really give that 24 to 48-hour grace period of code switching?
Sure. Sure. So code switching means in each home there's a code. And that might be in a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world. Everybody's parenting on the same page, but most people are not. So that means a child goes from one home to the other, and there's one code in one home and then another code in another home, which just means rules. Different ways the homes are run, different responsibilities that they might have in each home or may not have in a home. And so when a child goes from one home to the next, they have to take a minute to kind of think about, well, in this home I do this, and in this home I do this, which also means the parents have to think, oh, they're going from this home to this home. And in that home, they don't do this thing, or they do this thing. And then in this home, they do. And just to get a little specific, that might mean in one home, they don't make their bed and they don't clean up their room. But in another room, in another home, that is a value. We have chores in this home.
I also loved the idea when it comes to code switching of that being something that the child experiences in addition to people in either home. So when a kid
Mhm.
comes into each home, the parents that are in, or parents or children, everybody needs to kind of have that grace period of,
Mhm.
24 to 48 hours where everybody kind of recalibrates and says, "Oh, okay,
Mhm.
this person is in the home now. This is what's different. This is what feels different." Or this person's out of the home now. This is what feels
Mhm.
different and what is going to change. So when I really wrapped my head around that for me, it was so helpful and also gave me a different level of understanding what the child is going through when going into each home and leaving each home, and also what we as parents are experiencing that allows us to give ourselves grace in the anticipation of a child coming and going, and also the kind of recalibration period that happens when that child comes in and out of the home. The number one biggest question that came up over and over again was regarding discipline as a step parent.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
do you discipline as a step parent? What can you do? Like, how far can you go with discipline as a step parent? And um, is that something that's okay for a step parent to even have a say in when it comes to
Mhm.
discipline with the child?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is the biggest question that comes up. And as you and I have discussed so many times, it's kind of a behind the scenes thing where you and your partner have to come to some terms around discipline. And in the beginning, certainly, it does need to be the biological parent backing up the step parent in those moments of discipline. But that in the beginning, certainly you have to build a relationship. So we talk about connection, and building this kind of not buddy buddy relationship, because we don't need to be buddy buddy with children. That's not actually hugely helpful. But you do need to have a connection with them. And so the two parents need to be aligned on what is it that are the rules, and most importantly, what are the values. And you and I've talked about this so much because people say, like, how do you come up with discipline? And it's really based in values, which we could have a whole nother talk about what that means. But that, yes, a step parent can discipline. Discipline means teaching, which I think we forget sometimes because it sounds like such a harsh word, um, but not right in the beginning. It really does need to be the biological parent coming in saying, I support this. I support this because this is what the two of us believe for our family and our home and our children. For people who might be with their stepchildren more often than not, at a certain point, you have to step in and discipline. You do have to keep the rules. And I think where discipline gets thrown off in its ideals is that when children don't have discipline, they actually get anxious. So having the consistent rules and consistent ideas in a home actually makes a child feel safe because they say, oh, I know what to expect in this home. And if it's been set up that, we'll take your case, that dad says these are the rules, and then stepmom, bonus mom, Katherine. I don't even like the word stepmom. When
Yeah.
Katherine steps in and says, this is what we're doing, that idea, because you've connected with your stepchild first, and then dad's backed you up, that these are just the rules. They're not harsh. And we can often, because we think of them as so harsh versus teaching, we can get really thrown off about it. So, all of that to say, first and foremost, the parent, the biological parent, should say what the rules are and back up the step parent. And then once you've connected, and there's so many ways to connect with a child, um, again, I feel like we could have a whole nother conversation about that. That there are so many ways you can connect with a child, that if you've done that, that when you're stepping in and saying, no, you go make your bed and you clean up and you do your homework at this hour, or you don't say these things, or you do these things, then it's an understanding because it's in your family.
So it seems that the real root of the discipline conversation that came up so much is really the parents being on the same page to back each other up
Mhm.
more
Mhm.
than any other route that discipline can go down. It seems that number one most important thing, biological parent begins with the discipline, and
Mhm.
that at the end of the day, the step parent and the biological parent that are in the relationship together are aligned with what their values are, what the rules are in the home, and that they are there to back each other up, which removes any, I guess, any direct negativity that would be associated with just the step parent being the disciplinarian.
Being on the same page about things isn't always easy. And that's because we're all raised differently and we all have different ideals around what it is that we should be doing as parents or how we should be raising our children. And so getting on the same page is really a practice. And at least from what I know, in our conversations, you and Chris have done a lot of conversations around that. What is it that, how is it that we want to raise our children? I know you talk to your mom a lot about that.
Mhm.
How is it that you parented, and how is it that we were parented? And you rely on those things. And when two people talk about it, you have a lot more chance, even if you don't agree, of being on some similar page, versus there being, as you said, that kind of negativity that comes in, or perceived negativity that comes in because another person has stepped in. And I'll just say this, that if um, you were at a park and a child um, was hurting in some way or was upset in some way, you would step in to help that child. And there wouldn't be any perceived negativity if you stepped in to help that child and you're in no way related to them. So if we can kind of think about, like, oh, we're all kind of just trying to figure this out. We're just trying to raise good kids and have the same values. And those values it's not real far that we have to reach to figure them out. Then it makes a whole lot more sense rather than like, oh, someone's doing something wrong here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's also, the discipline subject for a step parent, also goes with the other big subject that came up with people's questions, which was the idea of how do I step in as a step parent and not overstep as a step
Mm.
parent? Like establishing what your roles and responsibilities are as a step parent can feel very confusing and overwhelming because everyone's are so different, and also they're never really laid out with, okay, you're a step parent, this is what roughly your roles and responsibilities are. So
Mhm.
how do you help people navigate that part of entering into being a step parent?
Mm. It's very specific to each family. And I guess I kind of always hesitate with these kinds of answers because it really does depend on the specifics of the family. But I would kind of go back to the same thing that I said before, which is if the two people that are in partnership or married decide that together, it helps everyone make a lot more sense of it. Um, Oftentimes, there can be feelings when a step parent steps in. They step in, they do things because they are available or they're capable, or it's their home and they're just doing the things that are they're responsible for in their own home. And there can be feelings from another side about that. So if at all possible, and this is not always an easy road, for everyone to have a conversation. And I'm sure there's somebody that's going to listen to this right now and laugh so hard because they're thinking to themselves, there is no conversation that is going to happen between all of us. Um, but if there can be, even if it's not with, if the two step parents are having difficulty, can the biological parents have conversations? Can you have that mediated in some kind of way between another party? Even if that's an online app of some sort where you schedule so that there is some separation and people feel like we're just putting the kids first. And that, I know you and I have had so many conversations about this where it's really the children that matter
Mhm.
in everything. And you're so good about saying, I'm going to set aside my feelings. I'm going to set aside my, um, the amount of time that I've put into this because it's really about a child. And I would say if that's where people can step back and just say, I might have feelings about this, but can I just remember that really the point of all of this is we're taking care of small children.
That was one thing that I will say was a big learning lesson for me that I think I needed to have reiterated to me by you several times was, when it comes to the role as a step parent, that it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about Chris. It's not about, the whole co parenting group or anyone's feelings about certain things. It's all about the child. And
Mhm.
that as a step parent, you need to put all of those other feelings and things aside and just focus on doing what's best for the child in the situation. And yes, that sounds nice to do, and it's something for me as a step parent, you always keep in your mind, like, this is my role as a step parent. My role is, doing what's best for the child. And on the other hand, you have this other part of, well, what do I want as the parent and the step parent? And what are my feelings in that? So it's kind of a little bit of a constant dance. And I know that a lot of the other step parents I've talked to feel this of like this constant dance of how do you prioritize everything being about the child that's going
Mhm.
in between two homes while also paying attention to your own feelings and values and not totally casting those aside and disregarding those because that always ends up coming back around in feelings of resentment or anger or frustration.
Mhm.
So that's been
Mhm.
something that I've really been able to utilize my time spent with you to talk through because the last thing that you want as a step parent is for your feelings of frustration or putting your feelings aside or feelings of I'm doing too much, I want to be doing more or I want to be doing less or this wasn't listened to, this isn't the way that I would do it. Any sort of challenge that you're having as a step parent, the biggest thing is not having that come out towards this your stepchild and really having a
Mhm.
place, whether that's with your significant other or with a therapist like you or with your friends or any fellow step parents that you might know, to be able to
Exactly.
have that outlet to have those conversations so they're talked about and tended to feelings and not totally disregarded in this
Mhm.
mindset of it all being about the stepchild.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point because you are a human too. And you in particular, you like so many other step parents are doing so much. And like you said, it's this confusing role where, and I imagine that it's really interesting for you because when it comes to your three biological children, you're probably very clear. You know, I
Yeah,
know what my role is. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know
right.
exactly what my thoughts, my feelings, my values are, what discipline is going to happen, where I step in, where I don't, which I don't think is anywhere. You always do. And it's always clear to you. And then you have this other relationship where you're being told, um, this is really hard because there's all these other adults that are involved in this. And the child's going back and forth. And we really need to think about them. And so you, as the grown up, have to say, oh, I have to be a grown up in this moment and step back. And yet you're still a human with feelings. And so, um, as you said, resentment can build. And the last thing you want to do is make the child feel like that, but feel like you're upset about something. But it is important that these conversations happen. It is important that people talk to whomever they can. And I think you and I have always been on the same page. It's great if you can have a therapist, if you can have a coach, if you can't read books. This is a subject that there needs to be more talked about. And
Mhm.
I often will joke with you and say, this is your next book.
No, this is your next book, Ashley.
No, this is your next book.
I mean, it's really it's such a, as I said, it's like such a big topic that, even as we're talking about these different questions that come up from different people, that it's everyone's situation and dynamic as a step
Ah,
parent is
so different.
so different. And there are some similarities,
Mhm,
people will come up and they'll say, "Oh, do you do this?" or "How do you
mhm,
handle this?" And you can, um, connect with certain people in their different roles. But it is so different and unique in everyone's
mhm,
setup and dynamic. And then, another big topic that, came up from the beginning when you and I would talk, but also that has come up from so many questions that were submitted is the co parenting group, how to
mhm,
have communication in general, but also just smooth communication with a co parenting dynamic, the importance of that, which I want to talk about. And one big thing that you mentioned to me from the beginning was viewing the co parenting individuals as really a team and the team being team child. So
mhm,
having that in your mind is leaving feelings from the past, which is important for the people who are the biological
mhm,
parents, leaving feelings out of it, trying their best to leave feelings or, past things out of it, and really all coming together for the best interest of the child and communicating to the best of their ability for the benefit of the child. So,
mhm,
a lot of people have asked questions about how do you communicate with the co-parents and the importance of having good communication between all parental figures.
mhm. That's a long answer. I will try. I will try to sum it up. Um, Child centered co parenting is the key. And so, just to sum up what you said, that means putting the children in you said this, putting the children first, being able to put your feelings aside because what matters is the children. So much easier said than done.
Mhm.
And the ability to do that, and you mentioned this before, the ability to do that is really based on the ability for the people involved to be able to communicate. And when you're in a situation where there's a breakup, which there wouldn't be step children if there weren't a breakup,
Mhm.
then can be a lot of feelings. And as you said, every situation is so different. Some people go to therapy, some people talk to their friends, some people don't. And some people don't even know that they need to, or that they have built up resentment or what they're angry about. So it can be complicated. But if I would say the biggest thing, I would say, just if someone's listening to this right now, is if in every moment you can think to yourself, I'm putting my child first. I might be so angry at this person, or I might really dislike the person they've chosen to be with. Can I still try to set those things aside and put my child first? And that would be the way to try to co-parent. Um, and I spend a lot of time, I think you know this, I spend a lot of time working with separating and parents, not necessarily going through really nasty divorces because that's outside of my realm, but putting children first in a separation. And I see a lot of parents be able to do it. And they just really, it takes a while, but focusing on, we brought these children into this world. And because we did, that's what we're going to put first. And just kind of logistically, and I think I mentioned it before, if you can't talk, text. If you can't text, get an online calendar, get a mediator, get something. There are a lot of online ways to be able to communicate that will put a child's interest first. And by that, I mean the parents aren't fighting with one another. They're just kind of dealing with logistics. And in that way, a child doesn't feel that. And we know as adults, we know looking at children, they feel and they can tell what's going on. So the best you can do to set all of that aside. And if you can't, because you're just not there yet, try to do the best you can with something logistical, even if that's a text or an online calendar program. If you can get a coach, that would be amazing. I know everybody can't, but people do, and I'm not necessarily suggesting people pick up the phone and call me. Um,
Feel like
that
I don't
feels
have
like it would be
time.
a lot of phone. I feel like that would be a lot of phone calls.
Yeah. Yep.
But that they find somebody who they can meet with that will say, okay, these are the things you need to think about. Let's be child centric. That's the key word, child centric. Just put your kids first and
Yeah.
think about. Mhm.
I also think that, for people who are step parents and wanting help with navigating that role, or also feeling like so many people who, wrote in questions are struggling in their roles as step parents with not feeling seen, not feeling heard, not feeling supported, that a lot of that can be helped with having your own therapist for yourself, that
Mm.
you can use time with that therapist to talk about your feelings of or your struggles with your role as a step parent, so you have that sounding board, and again that it's not coming out in your moments of interacting with your stepchild. I think that's like a super important um, point, that step parents can struggle with. And of course, also being able to have that communication with, ideally also with your partner, the child's biological parent, to be able to voice your feelings, concerns, thoughts with them so they can understand, hopefully, where you're coming from is also a
Mhm.
huge part of parenting, but also especially co-parenting and better understanding your role as a step parent and hopefully allowing your partner to understand where you're coming from as you're navigating your role as a step parent. Wouldn't you say?
Mhm. I would, and it's making me think in this moment that we kind of have these very high expectations of ourselves and of other people. And if we can, when we're talking with somebody, our partners, the other parents involved, to kind of remember we're just humans kind of trying to figure this all out. And we're not, you're not necessarily telling somebody they're doing something wrong when you voice your opinion or when you say, I have this frustration or I just need to say this thing out loud. And if you can see a therapist or a coach or a baby group or a play group or a group of people in the same age group that have children in the same age group to try and say those things out loud, certainly to other people who you might be spending time with, because one of the things we say in therapy and certainly in group therapy is when you say these things out loud, you kind of practice it so you can take it to the people who it might feel harder to say something to. And if, as parents, as humans, as friends, we can just remember we're just all trying to figure this out together. And the more we can talk about something, probably the better off everyone is going to be. And when it comes to kids, certainly they're going to be better off if we talk more about what's going on and try to figure out a way to keep their little needs first, because they're kids. They don't have the agency that we do as adults.
One thing uh, that was another big subject or just question that came up was, is there one thing that you would tell people to avoid when blending families?
I would really avoid making a child a go between. So, um, saying something like, well, you need to tell daddy this, or you need to tell mommy this. And one of the biggest conversations I think I have with people, whether it's step parenting or just parenting in general, is age appropriate conversations, which isn't always easy to know. Um, what to say to a child. Um, but I always say just lead with curiosity. So if there seems to be something that's going on that you're not sure how to navigate with a child, you can always ask a lot of curious questions. Um, is there something that is your friends are saying? Is there something that you're hearing in school that is being talked about? And to really try to stay away from definitive answers um, when trying to understand something with a child. Because kiddos will tell you a lot if you have a number of conversations with them. But the one thing I would absolutely say to avoid is making a child a go between
Yeah.
and sharing, making a child share the information that you as an adult should really be sharing with their co parent, even if that's scheduling.
That was something that I remember you saying, and also I was lucky enough to be able to watch with my own parents, which was never saying anything negative about the other
Hmm.
parents in front of the child. When I was growing up, I had several friends who would go back and forth between homes. and they would go into one home and that parent would speak very negatively about the other parent, and
Mhm.
it would leave the child with, you know, confusion and questions and stress and anxiety about, you know, who is that parent really, or what am I supposed to be thinking
Mhm.
about that parent? So I watched, with my mom when my parents were separated, I watched my mom never say a negative thing about my dad to us children. And
Mm.
that was something that, you and I talked about very early on when talking about step parenting, was that the importance of that, and also what a gift it is to give to the child, never saying
Mhm.
anything negative
Mm.
about any of the co-parents to
Mhm.
the child is such an important thing to do, that I feel like,
Mhm.
you know, usually doesn't happen,
Mhm.
unfortunately, in so many co-parenting dynamics. People say things about each other, um and I'm always really grateful in my co-parenting dynamic that that is something that all of us really take very seriously, which is,
Mm.
we all try to be very supportive
Mhm.
for each other. And also, there's never any negative talk about each other to my stepchild. So that's a really big thing that
Mhm.
I think so many step parenting dynamics that I come across and am told about, or interact with other people in their step parenting journey, that that's always a really big issue that comes
Mhm.
up, is someone's upset, someone's bitter, someone's talking negatively, or,
Mhm.
causing a problem in that way and involving the children. And that's um, a really big no-no, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, and children have allegiances, and it's very difficult for them because they love their mom and they love their dad, and they might even love their stepmom and their stepdad. And they're just not old enough to be able to look at all the nuances of how relationships work, and how, as we get older, we get to see, oh, there's a lot to a relationship. But to a child, um, if if we say there's something wrong with their mother, then they think, well, there's something wrong with me because I am part of that person. I am from that person. She is my mother or a father, whatever it might be. It's very black and white in that way. And whenever I say things like that, it always makes me a little emotional because I'm so child centered that I think, like, oh, that's the hardest thing for a child, and it's so simple just don't say the things in front of the child because they don't get it. They don't understand the nuances in the way that we do when we say something like, ugh, they're so annoying,
Yeah.
whomever that person might be, ugh, they're so annoying when they do that thing, and the child looks and they says, oh, I do that thing. I must
Mhm.
be annoying or bad too. So we just
Yeah.
want to be very careful about those things.
I always love that with all of the advice that you give, because you're such a child centered person and professional, that everything that has come up in step parenting, that it really goes back to, for me, is getting in the mindset of the child, and
Mm.
coming at certain situations and things really with empathy and compassion, and
Mhm.
getting in the mindset of a child, and also what that
Mm.
must be like. And
Mm.
that, I think, is a really helpful thing for step parents and parents, but really step parents is, trying to kind of put yourself in that child's position sometimes,
Mm.
and that might change your perspective or understanding of certain things that, come up along the way, and has been
Mhm.
helpful for me in my journey as things come up to be able to kind of have some separation with certain things and allow for, okay, let me put myself in that child's shoes, or
Mhm.
let me think about what that must be like for the child. So
Mhm.
that's another kind of tip along the way for all of you step parents as you navigate your way there, to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, well, it's such an interesting thing. I would say, especially working with you, because you're so close to your family and you have incredible values and you always wanted to be a parent. I mean, at least I can't say from the time before I knew you,
Yeah.
but you were passionately from the moment I met you wanting to be a parent. You're passionate about being a step parent. You, as you have said prior to this and in other conversations we've had, you were in waters you had never been in, but it wasn't like it was waters you were still not passionate about because
Mhm.
you are so it's such a big part of who you are, to do this and to be a parent. And it's interesting just to watch how there just isn't much out there when you don't have resources to turn to. And I mean, this is a podcast that you do where you bring all these experts on and you talk to people, and if there were a lot of resources, you would have found them,
Yes,
to
I
be
would have.
able to navigate. Not only because of this,
Yep.
but because I know you
Yeah.
and you would have found them and there aren't. And so it is, it is something that people have to be thoughtful about in a different way. That I also think people are just parenting in a different way these days. So trying to show up and be the best that you can for children. I also think of your love for animals, and you just wrote a whole book on your love for a horse.
Yes. No.
I mean, this is so a part of who you are. And trying to figure this out when there isn't a lot of resources
Yeah.
means that it's not an easy thing to figure out. It's not black and white. And it's not something that, as you said in the beginning of this, that we could just take a number of different families and say, oh, it makes sense for people. That it's and I kind of hate this answer, but it's complicated,
Yeah.
you know?
It really is. I mean, it is, it's complicated, and I would say that, um, that step parenting, like parenting, can have its ups and downs, and it's really about, for me at least, it's about having the tools and um the ability to have conversation openly that really helps me along the way. And as things come up in my role as a step parent, being able to take them back to you or take them to Chris and have open conversations that you don't need to figure out in real time as they come up in that moment. That's a big
Mm.
thing that, we can be set off or triggered in certain situations, and being able to put that in your back pocket until you're able to talk them that issue through is a really big thing. And also understanding that, as I've mentioned several times, step parenting dynamics are different in every situation. And I want to be
Mhm.
very mindful of the fact that there are a lot
Mhm.
of step parenting dynamics that are really not great, that are very ugly, that,
Mhm.
people don't wanna talk to certain people. People don't wanna have a group text. They don't wanna have a phone call or an in-person meeting. And I feel very grateful and lucky that that's not the case for my dynamic and situation, and that we are all able to, communicate and have great conversation and good communication. And I want to be mindful of the fact that that's not the case for a lot of people. And that's really hard. And that's very rough
Mhm.
and very challenging. And that takes a whole other level of just patience and understanding and really, giving yourself and the situation grace, because that's that's challenging for sure. So again, everyone's dynamic is so different, and we didn't get to so many questions. So we're going to have to come and do this again, because otherwise this episode will
Okay.
be too long.